I'm talking today to Gregg Sando, who is the CEO of Cell Medica. Gregg, what is Cell Medica?
Well, Cell Medica is a very new type of company, and we're developing new treatments for patients with infections and cancer using the human immune system as the instrument to cure the body.
You were a banker before setting up Cell Medica. How did you make the transition to starting the company, and why did you do it?
Well, I was actually pre-med at university a long time ago, so the real question is how I ended up in banking. At various points in time throughout my banking career, I thought to myself I would really like to get back into science and form a science company. And in 2004, it was the right moment for me to do that, and that's how I started.
And you went back into education, or you went?
Yes, I needed to be retrained. Being out of science for a number of years, I knew I was behind and had to be brought up to speed. So I went to Imperial College and into their medical school and did a master's degree in immunology. And that actually worked beautifully well, not only in terms of bringing me up to date in terms of current science, current medical innovation, but also it put me in touch with a number of the leading research scientists developing this new way of using the human immune system to fight disease. And when I saw that, I was able to really start the company moving ahead.
So you met many of the people who are in your team now?
Yes, they're my scientific advisory board right now, and they were many of my lecturers at Imperial.
So what are the products you make and what do they do?
Okay, so basically we're using the immune cells of the human body in different ways. In the infection application, we're actually treating patients after a bone marrow transplant when they're profoundly immunosuppressed. Many of these patients die of infections in the period after the bone marrow transplant. What we do is we go back to the donor that provides the bone marrow, but we also select other mature immune cells that give you immunity to various types of viruses and pathogens that we encounter every day. And we can select those cells from the donor and transfer those separately to the patient and restore immunity into the patient at a much earlier point than would normally be the case through the development of these bone marrow cells into a functioning immune system in the patient.
So in effect, by doing that, you're turning back on the immune system.
Yes, that's right. It's a very special capability that we can provide, which no antiviral drug, for example, can provide. They only essentially interrupt the replication of the virus in the patient while the patient's own immune system develops to combat the infection. What we do is give the cells that restore immunity to the patient right away.
And does that have wider applications than just bone marrow transplant?
Yes, it does, but the bone marrow transplant is the most classic model, and that's where we're starting.
Yeah.
Because here you have a patient without an immune system, and you go to a healthy donor with an immune system, and we're transplanting the cells specifically that will fight a particular infection. So once we establish that model, we can then go on in more complicated settings.
And are there competing approaches in scientific terms?
In the infection space, of course, there's antiviral drugs, but an antiviral drug, as I mentioned earlier, can only interrupt the replication of the virus. It cannot achieve the endpoint which the doctors and, of course, the patient want, which is immunity, natural immunity to the particular pathogen that you're targeting. So only our cell therapy can deliver that endpoint.
So why did you choose these particular products?
Well, for one, I think the science was very developed at the point in time when we became interested in taking these forward. This is a very different way of treating patients. It's a patient-specific therapy, so we're not putting things in a bottle and shipping them all over the world. We're actually treating each patient individually. So the challenge here is
it's a process rather than a drug.
Yes, that's right. In a way it is. We need to demonstrate not only that we can work with the immune system and deliver these therapies for efficacy in the patient, we also have to show from a commercial model standpoint that you can treat patients individually like this and make it work. Because in order for this type of treatment to be routinely used in the medical system, there has to be an ability to make it commercially successful at the same time.
And how is that done? Because if it's done on a kind of bespoke one-by-one basis, what's the commonality point?
Well, you need to target very high-value applications initially. So we're treating patients at risk of mortality, death from infection, in this very special setting post bone marrow transplant. And we're also treating patients with advanced cancer in our cancer applications. So these patients are already being treated intensively through very expensive drugs and medical care. So if we can demonstrate that our cell therapy works here, we can charge the appropriate reimbursement price from the medical system to actually allow us to deliver the cell therapy on a patient-specific basis.
And at the heart of the problem is something called the adenovirus latent infection, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which is the
That's
thing that...
one of our 3 applications. Yeah.
Okay, so that's one of them.
Yeah, and that's an application for pediatric patients, children, following a bone marrow transplant. And it's very, very dangerous in these patients. Many children die after bone marrow transplant because of this adenovirus infection.
But 80% of the human population, approximately, has this virus. Why do scientists think we have this thing that kills us?
Well, it's not a very pleasant thought, but the fact is that we all carry what's called latent viruses inside of us from a very early age. For people with a healthy immune system, having these viruses persistently in the body is never a problem because the immune system controls it. But when you become immunosuppressed, in particular after a bone marrow transplant, when you are profoundly immunocompromised, these viruses can sort of rise up, they reactivate, and they cause many problems. But a good example would be, for example, chickenpox. Most people realize you get that at a young age, but actually the chickenpox virus never leaves your body, and it can reemerge at a later point in your life in the form of shingles. So we carry these viruses, but
so
in most people...
It's like if you get malaria, malaria is with you.
Yeah, malaria is another very
Yeah.
persistent, it's not a viral infection, but it is another form of persistent infection.
Yeah.
And yeah, some people control malaria and others don't, based upon the composition of your individual immune system.